Today we're out in the woods a little bit because I am always talking to folks about plants, about medicinal plants that were used by early settlers. And very often when I'm talking to people, what I'm showing you are dried specimens or maybe even some plants that I cut the day before or that morning. But today I thought it would be really wonderful to come out and actually see these plants where they're growing. Today is April the 8th, so you can see what's growing right now here in Appalachian Mountains, right here in this region, and some of the plants that are growing. Now, as many of you will know, we only talk about native plants. There are many plants you can see right around the area around my feet here, or I can see around my feet here, that are not native. There are dandelions all over right now, not native. So hensbit, yellow over the ground, purple dead nettle, which all sort of look like each other, not native. But right behind me is one of my favorites that's really kind of an interesting flower because it goes through this really interesting transformation. You can see this plant right here. This is, you see it looks like it has these sort of purple leaves on it, and it has interesting leaves because the purpley blooms, the leaves are different shapes. This is golden ragwort, which seems like a really strange name when you look at it in this version before it blooms out because it looks purple. Over here is one that's starting to bloom out. And so you can see it's starting to get yellow, and it really becomes this beautiful sort of sunflower yellow flower, golden ragwort. It's also called squawweed, which you can probably tell by the name, used to treat a variety of female complaints. So that is a really common plant that you'll see growing all along the roadsides, but that is a medicinal plant. Now right over here across the way here is another one of my favorites. It's a tree, and many of the medicinal plants that are used are trees. Barks are used, berries are used, leaves or fruit, all different parts of the tree have been used as medicine. As always, I need to stress that this is a nature walk and a history program time. This is not medical school, so please remember that we're learning about things, but please remember to use caution in the way that we regard history from the things that we learn. But this is a really neat tree. I want to come back and see this one again in the fall because that's when it really does its thing. This is witch hazel, which many people are already familiar with because its wonderful astringent qualities, that it's used as a toner, it's used on irritated skin of all kinds. The pods here, they're kind of opening up, so they're just falling right off. It looks kind of strange to be springtime. This tree blooms in the fall. It blooms around October. It's kind of a Halloween tree, so it has this really neat sort of yellowy firework thing that it does, and that we'll only see later on in the fall. So that's a really, really wonderful plant that we see growing here. Down here underneath our witch hazel tree, we actually have a bunch of them. They sort of grow in a kind of a grove fashion. We have a really neat little plant. This is toothwort, and you can see quite a few of them growing around here. They have this really interesting jaggedy leaf, which unfortunately looks like a little something that we would not want to be finding in the woods because people should not be growing that. At least not anywhere that anybody's going to find them growing it. Not a good thing to be growing in the woods. But this is a lovely native plant, toothwort, and it's really pretty. It's one of the first things that blooms. It can have sort of these sort of pinkish white blooms. They can be more white or more pink. And as you might suspect from that name, it is used, has been used by the Cherokee in particular to treat toothaches and to treat colds and things of that nature. Primarily the root is dug up and used for that purpose because it is a really good analgesic for those kinds of illnesses. And it's a really beautiful flower, and you can see it's a nice addition out in the forest anyway, but it also has some lovely medicinal qualities. So I'm over here in just a different spot of the woods to show you a couple of my other favorite plants, including some that I love. I have a lot of great family connections with some of these. I also found a little extra treat today. These are some morels growing here, so I'm pretty excited about those. Nice to see those mushrooms growing here. Edible mushrooms, they're beautiful. But we also have some mayapple here. And so mayapple is a really, really interesting, beautiful plant, North American mandrake. And if you've ever seen some of the programs I do, I have a lot of the roots. I'm not going to pull up any right now. I want them to grow and thrive. I'm not going to uproot anybody. But you can see they kind of spiral up out of the ground. So I describe this to people very often when I'm doing the program. So it's wonderful to be able to show them to you right here in their natural habitat where they're coming right up out of the ground. They just twirl right up like little umbrellas. And then what they'll do is these will spin out and become like a big flat umbrella later on as the season goes on. They're called May apples. It's April. They won't actually make the apples until May. They make a little apple-y kind of fruit under here, which wild turkeys love, unfortunately, so a lot of times people don't get to eat them. But the medicinal part of the May apple is it's pretty tricky, like most medicines. You have to be very careful with. It is an extremely useful laxative, really, really effective laxative. So that's really what it has always been used for historically. But it's also a really pretty plant growing up. You can see a lot of other little things growing up here around it, including there's some nice wild strawberry, which has some lovely properties in addition to being able to eat. So one of my favorite plants that I enjoy talking about with people is bloodroot, and I'm really excited that I had some to show today here growing wild, because bloodroot wilts really quickly. Here's this sweet little white flower that it has. You can see the petals are falling right off. They don't last on there very long, the petals. But the neat thing about the bloodroot is the leaf, and they don't preserve very well. I don't like to bring a lot to carry around. I don't want to hurt the plants very much. I like to leave them in the wild as much as I can. But what's really interesting about the bloodroot, as you might guess from the name, if I were to root down in here and get in the dirt and dig up the root, it would be red and bloody. It would look like I had dug up something and killed it. But this is in fact a beautiful plant, and the red dye is used traditionally, the Cherokee used it to dye baskets with, but they also use the root for medicinal purposes. And one of the most interesting things about that is the idea about plants very often is that we can look at them and look at their structures and their shapes, and that it's going to tell us something about how we use it. If you look at this leaf, which I often try to describe to people in programs, this leaf looks just like your lungs. You don't even have to use your imagination very much. Some specimens really are just beautiful. You can really see that shape, both lobes, the trachea right up the middle, just gorgeous shape of the lungs. And the root of this plant then would be powdered, dried, and taken as a snuff to help with respiratory complaints, stuffy nose. Because the idea is that if you're having respiratory problems, if you have congestion in your chest and things, well, this looks like your lungs. And so in order to clear your lungs out, you would take something that sort of looks like your lungs. So it's really interesting to see all these different plants and to see what's growing right around the corner this time of year on this beautiful spring day. So the last thing I want to talk about a little bit today is one that's just coming up, one of my personal favorites too. This is some pokeweed, just getting started here, coming up. And poke is a wonderful plant for the root. Here's part of the root, which the Cherokee would powder, dried, and put on old wounds. Really interesting kind of treatment for that. Poke berries, of course, are toxic, although they make a nice dye. And they are used in very small quantities by the Cherokee to treat things like rheumatism primarily. The leaves, when they're fresh and tender like this, are often eaten, so this would be a good time to harvest a little bit. You don't want to do it once they get bigger. But right now, we could cut us off some nice leaves, makes a really nice poke salad, maybe with a few ramps or something else to go together to make it delicious and wonderful. Thank you for joining me for a little walk in the woods, and I hope you enjoyed seeing some of our beautiful medicinal plants.